My name is Pauline, I'm 73 years old, and I watched my own son put a sleeping pill in my tea. Before I tell you about the moment I confronted him with a syringe in his hand, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are quiet, almost sacred in their predictability. Since my husband Pierre passed away 2 years ago, I've clung to routines like a life raft in a vast, silent ocean of grief. Coffee at dawn as the birds begin their chorus, the meditative pruning of my roses, a novel in the afternoon that takes me to other worlds. My home, this house filled with the ghosts of laughter and love, is my sanctuary. My son, Nicholas, he was a Sunday person. Every Sunday, like clockwork, he'd visit for lunch. We'd talk, or rather, I'd listen as he painted a carefully edited picture of his week, a bright facade I was beginning to suspect had cracks underneath. But this was a Tuesday, and the doorbell chimed just as the sun began its slow descent, bleeding orange and purple across the sky and casting long, skeletal shadows through my living room that made familiar furniture look menacing. It was Nicholas. He looked frayed. That's the only word for it. The dark circles under his eyes were deeper than they'd been on Sunday, veritable bruises against his pale skin, a testament to sleepless nights I knew nothing about. His smile was a quick, sharp thing, a reflexive twitch of the lips that didn't have the strength to reach his eyes. They remained distant, haunted, looking at me but seeing something else entirely. He was thinner, too, his favorite jacket hanging loosely on his frame. "Mom," he said, the cheerfulness in his voice so forced it was almost brittle, like thin ice over deep, dark water. I was in the neighborhood for a meeting that ran late. Thought I'd stop by. "You want some tea?" "I'll make it." I froze, my hand hovering over my book. A meeting? On a Tuesday evening? Nicholas worked in sales, but his meetings were always downtown, never in my quiet suburban enclave. And more jarringly, in all his 42 years, Nicholas had never once offered to make me tea. I was the caregiver, the one who fussed, the one who poured. It was a small thing, a tiny crack in the foundation of our established dynamic, but it sent a tremor of profound unease through me. Still, I pushed it down. He's just being thoughtful, I told myself, a desperate lie to maintain the peace. I smiled, a gesture I hoped looked more natural than it felt. "That would be lovely, dear." I settled into my favorite armchair, the worn velvet one Pierre and I had haggled for at an antique market in the French countryside decades ago. Its familiar comfort did little to soothe the growing chill inside me. I opened my book, pretending to find my page, but my gaze was locked on his reflection in the dark, convex glass of the curio cabinet. The glass distorted him, made him look like a stranger in my home. I watched him fill the kettle, his movements jerky and uncertain, a stark contrast to his usual confident grace. He opened the cupboard, took down the tin of my favorite chamomile tea, and then he paused. His back was to me, a wall of tension in his shoulders. I saw his hand slip into the pocket of his jacket. It emerged with something small and white, pinched between his thumb and forefinger. With a furtive glance over his shoulder, so quick he thought I couldn't possibly have seen, he dropped the pill into my empty cup. The tiny click it made against the porcelain was deafening in the quiet room, a sound that would echo in my nightmares. Then he poured the steaming water over it, the swirl of the liquid dissolving the evidence, erasing his crime before it was even committed. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it seized in my chest, a painful, crushing fist. A cold wave, sharp and numbing, washed over me. I felt lightheaded, the words on the page blurring into meaningless shapes. This was my son. My only child. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike on this very street, the one whose fevers I'd soothed with cool cloths, whose scraped knees I had meticulously cleaned and bandaged. The boy whose graduation photo sat proudly on the mantelpiece. And he had just tried to drug me. He brought the tea over, the very picture of a devoted son, a mask of concern perfectly in place. "Here you go, Mom. Careful, it's hot." I looked up at him, my eyes scanning his face, desperately searching for a flicker of the boy I knew, for a hint of remorse, for anything other than this chilling, hollow performance. I found nothing. He was a stranger wearing my son's skin. I smiled, my lips feeling stiff and foreign, like they belonged to someone else. My hand trembled as I reached for the cup, a betraying tremor I quickly masked by steadying it with my other hand. I had to know. I had to know how deep this darkness went. I brought the cup to my lips, the fragrant steam a cruel mockery of comfort. I have to know why, I thought, the question a silent scream in my mind. This wasn't just about seeing what he would do next, it was a mother's last, desperate attempt to understand what had happened to her child's soul before she had to surrender him to the world. I pretended to take a long, slow sip, letting the steam cloud my face and hide my expression. The moment he turned away to put the kettle back on its base, I leaned over, feigning an adjustment to my reading lamp. In that swift, fluid motion, I poured the contents of the cup into the rich, dark soil of the large fern beside my chair. The plant had been a gift from Pierre for our 40th anniversary. It felt like a sacrilege, poisoning this living memory of his love, but my survival, my clarity, was paramount. For the next 20 minutes, an eternity measured by the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, I held the nearly empty cup, occasionally lifting it to my lips, playing the part of a woman winding down her day. Nicholas sat across from me, scrolling through his phone with a feigned nonchalance, but I could feel his gaze on me. Every few seconds, he'd look up, a flicker of hungry anticipation in his eyes. Each glance was a small, sharp cut to my heart. The silence in the room was a heavy blanket, suffocating me. With every tick of the clock, a memory ambushed me. Nicholas tapping his fingers nervously on the arm of his chair, and suddenly I was back in our old kitchen, the smell of cookies in the air, watching a 10-year-old Nicholas tap that same rhythm on the table, waiting for me to check his report card, his face a mixture of hope and fear. He stared out the window at the darkening street, his face a blank mask, and the scene shifted. I saw him at 35, standing at that very same window, watching his wife drive away after telling him she wanted a divorce. His world had crumbled then, and I remembered the ugly, protracted fight over the custody of his children, how it had hollowed him out, leaving him bitter and adrift. He'd fought to keep the house, to maintain a semblance of stability for the kids, but his salary couldn't keep up. He'd lost. I thought of Pierre's funeral. The raw, gaping wound of his absence. The inheritance he'd left me wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to ensure I'd be comfortable, that I'd never be a burden. It was our life's work, meant for peace, not to become a motive for the unthinkable. I remembered talking to our family lawyer, a kind man who had patiently explained everything. The house was paid off, the investments were secure. "You're all set, Pauline," he'd said. Pierre made sure of it. The memory of Pierre's steady hand in mine, even in his final days, gave me a sliver of strength. He would have wanted me to be strong. Not just for me, but for the boy he had loved so much, the boy who was now lost in the body of this desperate man. Finally, summoning every bit of acting skill I possessed, I let out a loud, theatrical yawn. "Oh, I said, pressing a hand to my mouth. "I don't know why I'm so tired all of a sudden." Nicholas was on his feet in an instant, his voice laced with a false concern that made my skin crawl. "You should get to bed, Mom. You've had a long day." He helped me up, his touch feeling alien and cold despite the warmth of his hand. I let him guide me to my bedroom, leaning on him more than I needed to, playing the part of the frail, drowsy mother. I got into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. "Good night, dear," I whispered, letting my eyes flutter shut. "Good night, Mom," he said, his voice soft, almost a caress. He closed the door, but not completely. He left it open just a crack. A mistake. And I waited, my body still, my mind a raging storm. The house was silent for a few minutes, a silence that felt heavy with intent. Then, I heard the soft creak of floorboards. He was moving. I slipped out of bed, my movements slow and deliberate, and crept to the door, my eye pressed to the tiny gap. He wasn't just stealing. He was hunting. He moved with a chilling purpose, going straight to my antique secretary desk in the living room. He didn't rifle through it, he began pulling open specific drawers, his movements methodical and urgent. He found my file of financial documents, the one clearly labeled personal. He took out my bank statements, my investment portfolio, my life insurance policy. He laid them out on the polished wood and took out his phone, not to call, but to photograph everything, to flash a series of silent, damning explosions in the dim light. My blood ran cold. This was more than a simple robbery driven by a desperate need for cash. This was calculated. This was an erasure. He put the papers back, his search not yet over. He moved through the living room, gathering small, valuable things, my mother's pearl necklace, the silver candlesticks Pierre had inherited from his grandmother, items whose sentimental value far outweighed their monetary worth. He was erasing my life's treasures, packing them away as if I were already gone. Then he picked up his phone again. He didn't make a call. He started texting, his thumbs flying across the screen. He was so focused on his grim task, on gathering my possessions, that he left the phone on the desk, screen up, while he carried a small box of my jewelry into the kitchen, presumably to wrap it in a dish towel to prevent it from rattling. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but I knew I had to see. It was a terrible, insane risk, but not knowing was a torment I couldn't bear. I slipped out of the room, my bare feet silent on the old wood floor. The air was cold on my skin. My hands shook as I picked up his phone. The screen was bright in the dim room, a beacon of betrayal. The messages were right there, a conversation thread under the name Marcel. Marcel, is she out yet? The stuff I gave you is strong. Shouldn't take long. Nicholas, yeah. She's out. The pill worked. Marcel, good. Get the cards. All of them. And the policy numbers. Leave no trace. Marcel, the lake is the best plan. We push the car in. A tragic accident. Everyone will believe it. A grieving son inherits. A classic for a reason. And then, the last message. The one that shattered the last piece of my heart, grinding the shards into dust. Marcel, don't forget the final dose. We have to be sure she doesn't wake up. No loose ends. The final dose. I placed the phone back on the desk, exactly as I'd found it, my fingerprints now a ghostly presence on the screen. I was a ghost myself, retreating to my room, my mind screaming while my body remained chillingly silent. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a desperate son trying to pay off a debt. This was a death sentence, meticulously planned. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't be the victim. I would be the judge. I lay in bed, my body rigid, my ears straining in the silence. I heard him moving around for what felt like an eternity. The clink of silver, the rustle of papers. Then, the footsteps stopped. I heard the soft click of the front door closing as he likely took a bag of my things out to his car, a dress rehearsal for the final act. Then, the footsteps returned, slower this time, more deliberate. They were coming towards my bedroom. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The door creaked open, a sliver of hallway light cutting through the darkness. He stood there for a moment, a dark silhouette against the light, a figure from a nightmare. Then he stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him, plunging the room into near blackness. He moved towards my bed. The hallway light was gone, but the moonlight filtering through the window was enough. It was a cold, sterile light, and it caught something in his hand, a glint of metal and glass. A syringe. This was the final dose. This was the point of no return. Every illusion I had clung to about my son, about the good man buried deep inside, it all evaporated. The fear that had been a cold knot in my stomach for the last hour didn't disappear, but it transmuted. It hardened into something else. Something cold, sharp, and resolute. I was ready. He stood over me, his shadow falling across my face like a shroud. He raised the syringe. I could hear his ragged breathing in the quiet room, a sound that was both pathetic and terrifying. And just as he moved to push the needle towards my arm, my eyes snapped open. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I spoke, and my voice, though quiet, cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Why, Nicholas? He gasped, a choked, strangled sound, stumbling back as if I had physically struck him. The syringe fell from his nerveless fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. He stared at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock in the pale moonlight. Mom, you're awake. I've been awake the whole time, I said, sitting up slowly, my gaze never leaving his. My voice was steady, imbued with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I was awake when you put the pill in my tea. I was awake when you went through my desk. And I was awake when I read your text messages. I saw the color drain from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. What are you talking about? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. You're confused. Am I? I countered, my voice hardening. Marcel. The lake. The tragic accident. The final dose. I recited the words from his phone, each one a hammer blow, dismantling his pathetic denial. You are going to kill me, Nicholas. For money. For my life insurance. The denial was a last, desperate twitch before the end. No. Mom, it's not what you think. I needed. But the fight was gone from him. The facade of the cold-hearted planner had crumbled, and all that was left was the terrified, broken man underneath. He sank to his knees, his body shaking. And then he broke completely. A raw, guttural sob tore from his throat, and he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with the force of his despair. He confessed everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of shame and self-pity. The job loss he'd been too ashamed to tell me about 6 months ago. The mounting debts to dangerous people who weren't as patient as a bank. The missed promotion at his last job that was his final hope before everything fell apart. He talked about his divorce, about feeling like a failure who couldn't even help with his own kid's college fund. He had seen my inheritance not as my security, but as his only way out. He was trapped, and in his desperation, he had allowed a monster named Marcel to convince him that my death was a solution. I listened to it all, the torrent of excuses and rationalizations. But I felt nothing. The part of me that would have rushed to comfort him, to soothe his pain, was gone. It had been burned away by the image of that syringe, by the cold calculation in those text messages. When he finally fell silent, his sobs reduced to shuddering breaths, I looked down at the broken man who was my son. I thought about calling the police. I thought about having them drag him out of my house, out of my life. But I knew that would be the easy way out for him. It would allow him to be a victim of circumstance, a good man who made a bad choice. No. He needed to face what he had done. Not what the world did to him, but what he chose to do. I will help you, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I will give you the money to pay your debts. But it is not a gift. It is a loan with one condition. He looked up, a flicker of pathetic hope in his tear-filled eyes. You will take this money, I said, my voice like steel, and you will fix the mess you've made with those people. And then, you will walk into a police station, and you will tell them everything you did tonight. You will take responsibility. That is the price. You either choose that path, or I will pick up the phone and call a lawyer and the police right now. The choice is yours. He stared at me for a long moment, the reality of his situation, the starkness of his options, sinking in. The hope died in his eyes, replaced by a dull, hollow acceptance. Then, he slowly, painfully, nodded. He got to his feet, a man twice my size looking like a lost, scolded child, and walked out of my room, and out of my house. The moment the front door clicked shut, the strength that had held me together for hours finally gave way. My legs buckled, and I sank to the floor next to the fallen syringe. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it felt like I was drowning in an icy sea. I wrapped my arms around myself and I wept. I didn't cry out of fear, not anymore. I cried for the son I had lost tonight, the boy who had disappeared so long ago, leaving this stranger in his place. I cried for the love that had been twisted into something so monstrous it was unrecognizable. It was the price of my survival, the terrible, lonely cost of being strong. 5 years have passed. Nicholas was sentenced to 7 years in prison but was granted parole after serving almost 5. He didn't use my money to hire a fancy lawyer, he used a public defender. After he paid his debts, he called me from prison and instructed me to donate the rest of the inheritance money to a foundation for victims of violent crime. It was the first step on a long, arduous road. Life is different now. He lives in a small, sparse apartment across town. He's a carpenter. I'm told he's good at it, that he finds a quiet peace in the simplicity of shaping wood with his hands. He's rebuilding his life, piece by piece, but it isn't easy. There are whispers, people in our small town who know his story. He carries his past with him every day, it's a shadow he can't outrun. Our Sunday lunches have started again. They are quieter now. The easy, thoughtless chatter is gone, replaced by a careful, deliberate honesty. We are like two people learning a new language, one where every word is chosen with weight and meaning. He tells me about his work, about a table he's building or a chair he's restoring. He tells me about the slow, difficult process of reconnecting with his children, who are now young adults with wounds of their own. The old, comfortable warmth isn't there, but in its place is something else, respect. A fragile, hard-won trust. It's not a perfect, happy ending. Our relationship will forever carry the deep, jagged scar of that night. Sometimes, I sit in my armchair and look at the fern by my side. It's grown lush and green, thriving in its pot, oblivious to the poison it once absorbed. It's a strange, living reminder of the night I almost died. I've learned that true love isn't always about protecting someone from the world. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting them face the full, terrible consequences of their own actions. Forgiveness, I've discovered, isn't a single moment of grace. It's not about forgetting. It's about accepting a new, painful reality and finding the strength to keep living, to keep growing, even after the worst kind of storm. The doorbell rings. It's Sunday. It's Nicholas. He doesn't bring gifts anymore. He just brings himself. He steps inside, and we sit down for lunch. And after a few moments of quiet, he reaches across the table and takes my hand. His hand is callous now, rough from his work, so different from the hand I remember. It's a simple gesture, but it's enough. It's a bridge being rebuilt, slowly but surely. Thank you all for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt it was important. My question for you is, what do you think is the hardest part of forgiveness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more. It would mean the world to me.